The afternoon sun scorched the dirt field, making the air shimmer above the concrete barriers. Sweat dripped from the faces of raw recruits as they shuffled into formation, rifles clutched awkwardly, boots scuffing the dust. It was their second week of basic training at Fort Warren, and the tension between discipline and arrogance hung thick in the air. At the center of the field stood Captain Dalton, 52 years old, lean, sharp, with steel-gray eyes that could silence a room. To the recruits, she was just the new instructor, another by-the-book officer sent to bark orders. They didn't know her history, that she had led covert special forces operations across 2 continents, or that her silence came from things she could never unsee. They saw only a woman past her prime, standing too calm, too quiet. And in a place built on ego, quiet authority often drew ridicule. "All right, maggots," yelled Sergeant Harlan, the supervising officer, blowing his whistle. "Today, Captain Dalton's going to evaluate your tactical awareness. Treat her like the enemy. Let's see if any of you can outsmart her." Snickers broke through the ranks. One voice too loud called out, "Enemy. She doesn't even look like she can carry a rifle." The comment drew nervous laughter, said nothing. Her eyes just found the voice, Recruit James Riley, 19 years old, full of restless confidence. The kind of young man who mistook fearlessness for strength. "Recruit Riley," she said evenly, "you seem eager, step forward." He smirked, adjusting his helmet. "Yes, ma'am." "Good, you'll lead this drill." The recruits circled, excitement buzzing like static. Riley strutted ahead, rifle in hand. He'd grown up playing war video games, thinking combat was about bravado. Now he faced a woman who had lived it. "Your mission," said, her voice calm but commanding, "is to hold this ground. You have 10 seconds. He nodded. "Copy that. Begin." 10 seconds later she moved. No one saw her hands shift or her feet pivot, only a blur of motion. One moment she was 10 feet away, the next she was inside his guard, twisting his rifle just enough to make him lose balance. But Riley, reckless as he was, didn't back down. Instead, he pulled the weapon back and, in a rush of misplaced pride, pointed it directly at her head. The world froze. Every recruit around them stopped breathing. Even Sergeant Harlan blinked, unsure whether to intervene. His gaze didn't waver. Her voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. "That's not something you want to do, recruit." He swallowed, forcing a smirk. "Just playing the role, ma'am." "No," she said quietly. "You're testing something you don't understand." Her hand flicked once, and before anyone could register what had happened, the rifle was out of his grasp. It hit the ground with a sharp crack, her boot pinning it down as she stepped forward, close enough that Riley could see the fine scar running down her cheek, a reminder of a life that wasn't built in classrooms or barracks. "Lesson 1, she said, her tone flat, eyes locked on his. "You never point a weapon at someone unless you intend to face the consequences." He didn't respond. His face flushed red as the realization sank in, not just embarrassment but fear, not of her but of what he'd awakened. The recruit stood frozen, wide-eyed, unsure whether to clap or hide. Sergeant Harlan finally stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Captain Dalton," he said awkwardly, "maybe." She cut him off with a look that made him stop mid-sentence. "They need to learn what discipline looks like," she said, "and it starts with respect, not jokes." She lifted the rifle, handed it back to Riley, and walked away. No drama, no lecture, just silence and authority that lingered in the air like smoke after an explosion. The recruits stared after her. Nobody spoke, nobody laughed. And for the first time since arriving at Fort Warren, they realized they weren't training under just another officer. They were standing in the presence of someone who'd already been through hell and survived it. The next morning, Fort Warren was eerily quiet. The usual chatter before roll call had vanished. The recruits stood, spoke softer, and avoided eye contact with the woman who'd humiliated their loudest voice without breaking a sweat. Captain Dalton walked down the line with the same calm presence, unbothered, unreadable. Her boots made no sound on the concrete. She didn't need to raise her voice or flash rank. Respect followed her like a shadow now, though none of them could fully explain why. When her eyes landed on Riley, he instinctively stiffened. The cockiness that once filled his posture was gone, replaced by a haunted kind of focus. He hadn't slept much. All night he'd replayed that moment, the feel of the rifle slipping from his hands, the swiftness of her movement, the steel in her voice. He'd faced bullies before, even cops back home, but no one had ever looked at him the way she did, not with anger but disappointment. It was worse somehow. Stopped in front of him, "Recruit Riley." "Yes, ma'am." "You planning on thinking before you act today?" "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes narrowed slightly, not unkindly. "Good. Let's see if your mind can move as fast as your mouth." The recruit snickered quietly, but the sound wasn't mocking anymore. It was nervous, cautious, moved to the front of the formation and pointed toward the obstacle course. "Lesson 2, she began, voice even and clear. "A soldier who doesn't respect control loses it. You think strength is about muscle or speed or how loud you can shout orders. Wrong. Strength is being calm when the chaos starts." The recruits followed her gaze to the course: ropes, walls, mud trenches, balance beams. It was brutal, even for experienced soldiers. "You'll complete it blindfolded," she said simply, "as a unit." Murmurs rippled through the line. One recruit spoke up: "Blindfolded, ma'am, that's impossible," she finished for him. "So is surviving a firefight when your comms fail and you can't see through smoke. Do it anyway." Within minutes, blindfolds were distributed. Riley's heart pounded as the world went dark. He could hear breathing, shuffling boots, nervous laughter dying quickly into silence. "Follow my voice," said. Her tone was calm, unhurried. "Step, breathe, listen." At first, chaos ruled, recruits bumping into each other, tripping over ropes, cursing under their breath. But every time someone panicked, his voice steadied them. "Left foot. Feel the ground. Trust your team." Slowly, the noise turned rhythmic. Orders passed quietly between recruits. Riley found himself guiding the one beside him, repeating words, focusing on her voice above the confusion. By the end of the course, they emerged covered in dirt, sweat, and disbelief. They had done it blindfolded. Stood at the finish line, arms crossed. "You see, control isn't about what you see, it's about what you sense. A soldier who panics when he can't see doesn't make it home." Her gaze lingered on Riley a second longer before she turned away. Dismissed. The recruits scattered, whispering. Every one of them knew something had shifted. Later that evening, Sergeant Harlan found by the empty field, cleaning a sidearm she rarely used. "You got their attention now," he said. "That's not what I want," she replied, eyes never leaving the weapon. "I want their understanding." He hesitated. "You're harder on them than anyone else, especially that kid, Riley." Paused, setting the gun aside. "Because I see who he could be if he stops playing soldier and starts becoming one." Her voice softened, almost to herself. "Reminds me of someone I used to know." Harlan frowned. "Someone from the service." His eyes drifted to the horizon. "Someone who didn't get to come back." She stood, holstering the weapon. The sun dipped low, turning the base gold. The recruits watched her from a distance. The woman they'd once mocked, now a figure wrapped in mystery and strength. And though none of them could quite say why, every single one of them wanted to earn her respect. Because for the first time since arriving at Fort Warren, they finally knew what real leadership looked like. Night fell over Fort Warren like a heavy blanket. The recruits had turned in, their exhaustion deep, their respect for Captain Dalton deeper still. Yet, in the dimly lit command office, sat alone, staring at a faded photograph pinned inside her notebook. 5 faces smiled back at her, all in uniform, arms slung over each other's shoulders. One of them was her, younger, bright-eyed, hopeful. The others were gone. Afghanistan, 2009. Operation Shadow Gate, the mission that never made it to the news. The door creaked open softly. Sergeant Harlan stepped in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You're still up," he said, offering her one. She nodded. "Couldn't sleep, happens sometimes." He sat across from her, glancing at the photo. "Your old team." Her fingers traced the edge of it. "Delta Unit Bravo 7. We were sent to extract a field doctor trapped behind enemy lines. Everything went wrong." Harlan didn't interrupt. He knew when silence spoke louder than questions. "We made it in," she continued, her voice steady but distant. "But our location got compromised. They hit us before sunrise. There was smoke, screaming, chaos." Her eyes darkened. "I was the only one who walked out." Harlan swallowed hard. "That's when you retired." She nodded slowly. "Retired on paper. In truth, I stopped fighting when I lost them." For a moment the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Then, softly, Harlan said, "You didn't lose them. You survived for a reason. You're here, shaping the next generation." Smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I see them in every recruit I train. The arrogance, the fear, the potential. I keep hopping if I do this right. Maybe fewer names end up on folded flags." The next morning the recruits assembled again. The rumor mill had already started spinning. Someone had seen the photo, others had heard whispers. "She's a war hero," one said. "Her whole unit died," another whispered. "She killed 20 insurgents alone," a third added. By the time arrived, silence fell instantly. She could feel the weight of their stares. Soldiers were curious by nature, but curiosity could turn to pity fast, and pity was something she didn't tolerate. "Eyes front," she barked, and instantly the line straightened. "Today's exercise is not about strength," she said. "It's about survival." She led them to the training field, now covered with thick fog rolling in from the nearby marsh. The visibility was nearly zero. "You're going to navigate this field in teams of 2, she ordered. "There are sound traps hidden throughout. One wrong move and you're out." The recruits exchanged nervous glances. "This isn't just a game," she continued. "It's what combat feels like: confusion, fear, uncertainty, and the only thing keeping you alive is discipline." The whistle blew. Pairs moved cautiously through the fog, whispering directions, testing their steps. Riley was paired with a quiet recruit named Tors. They stumbled, tripped, and panicked when a sharp click echoed near their feet. A piercing alarm shrieked through the mist. Both froze. "Lesson 3's voice rang out from somewhere unseen, calm but commanding. "When fear takes over, logic dies. Breathe, think, control." Her tone anchored them. They reset, listening for every sound, moving slower. They finished last, but they finished. When the fog lifted, stood before them. "You're not fighting enemies out there," she said, pointing toward the horizon. "You're fighting your own instincts. Learn to master those and you survive." Her gaze lingered on Riley again. He was different now. The swagger had melted into focus. That night the recruits gathered around the fire pit outside the barracks, still buzzing from the drill. "You know," Riley said quietly, "I thought she was just another officer trying to prove something." Tors nodded. "No, she already proved it. We're the ones trying to catch up." Watched them from her window, the faintest smile touching her lips. For the first time in years, the weight of the past didn't crush her, it guided her. And though the ghosts of Bravo 7 would always follow her, she finally understood her purpose. She wasn't training soldiers. She was training survivors. Dawn came in pale streaks of gray and orange, slicing across Fort Warren's training ground. The recruits were assembled before sunrise, nerves tight, eyes sharp. Stood before them, clipboard in hand, unreadable as always. "Today's simulation will be the most realistic you've faced yet," she said. "Live blanks, smoke grenades, flash noise, and full tactical execution. You'll treat this as if it's a real combat zone. That means no panic, no shortcuts, and no ego." Riley swallowed hard. He'd been dreading this one. Ever since the fog drill, he'd become her quiet observer, watching how she moved, how she commanded control without fear. He wanted to prove he learned. They moved out in formation. The air was dry, tense, filled with the smell of oil and sand. The hills behind the field shimmered under the growing heat. When the first explosion hit, it was deafening. Smoke plumed into the air, thick and white, obscuring everything. The recruits ducked, covering their heads instinctively. "Positions," Riley shouted, remembering her words. "Cover your partner." Through the chaos, walked calmly, shouting clear commands. "Stay low, move in pairs, watch your corners." Her voice was a lifeline slicing through the noise. Then something unexpected happened. A blinding flash burst too close to one of the storage units, an accident caused by a faulty smoke canister. The wooden frame ignited, flames licking upward. The wind shifted, pushing smoke directly toward the trainees. "Fire!" someone screamed. "It's real." Panic broke loose. Recruits scattered, coughing, disoriented. The simulation had just turned into a real emergency. Riley froze for a second, torn between orders and instinct. The smoke burned his lungs. He could barely see 2 feet ahead. Somewhere, someone was shouting for help. And then through the chaos appeared. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes fierce and focused. "Riley, on me." He stumbled toward her, covering his mouth with his sleeve. "Ma'am, it's spreading fast." She nodded once, scanning the area. "Grab the extinguisher from the truck, move." He sprinted across the field, coughing hard, found the red canister and dragged it back. Was already pulling 2 recruits out of the smoke, pushing them toward safety. Her movements were precise, fearless, the kind of calm that came from having seen far worse. The flames roared higher, heat pressing down like a wall, directed them like a battlefield commander. "Form a line, work together. Nobody moves alone." For 10 minutes, chaos battled discipline. Fire hissed, smoke billowed, orders shouted through the haze, and slowly, inch by inch, they beat it back. When the final flames died out, silence fell heavy, disbelieving. Recruits stood covered in soot and sweat, staring at the charred remains of the storage unit. Lowered the extinguisher, breathing hard. Her uniform was blackened, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear but adrenaline. "Roll call," she ordered. One by one, voices answered. No one was missing. Relief hit the group like a wave. Some dropped to their knees. Others simply stared at her. Riley couldn't take his eyes off her. The woman who had once been just a name on a clipboard had just led them through something real. Sergeant Harlan came running, eyes wide. "What the hell happened out here?" "Faulty smoke device," said calmly, wiping soot from her face. "But they handled it." "They handled it," he repeated. "Captain, they just faced a live fire." "Exactly," she said, turning to the recruits. "And nobody quit." A quiet pride filled the group. They had trained under pressure, and for the first time they'd responded like soldiers, not scared kids. Later, when the field was cleared and the last traces of smoke drifted away, Riley approached her. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you didn't even flinch out there." She gave a tired smile. "Flinching doesn't help anyone." He hesitated, then asked, "Is that what combat feels like?" Her eyes darkened, distant. "No," she said softly, "that was just a glimpse." Riley nodded slowly, realizing that what they'd faced wasn't just an accident. It was the moment everything changed. From that day forward, nobody called her the old soldier. They called her Captain Dalton, the one who ran toward fire when everyone else ran away. 2 days after the fire, Fort Warren was unusually still. The recruits went through drills quietly, as if afraid to disturb the air that carried Captain Dalton's name like a commandment. She was no longer just their instructor. She had become something else entirely, proof of what real courage looked like. Still, none of them truly knew her. They respected her, feared her, even admired her, but they didn't understand the quiet weight she carried in her eyes. That changed one gray morning, when the base commander arrived unexpectedly during inspection. "Captain Dalton," Colonel Reeves greeted, shaking her hand firmly. "Heard about your little fire incident. Impressive work." "Just did my job, sir," she replied. Reeves smirked. "You've been doing more than that. These recruits were a mess last month. Now they're outperforming half the senior platoons. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." He turned toward the recruits. "You know who's training you, right? I doubt any of you do." Riley exchanged a glance with Tors. They'd heard rumors, but no one dared ask. Reeves folded his arms. "Captain Dalton is Special Forces, 2 tour in Afghanistan. Led Operation Shadow Gate classified, but I can tell you this much. Her unit saved over a dozen civilians under direct fire. She came home alone." The field fell silent. No one moved. The words "came home alone" hit like a punch. His expression didn't change, but her hand twitched slightly, a tiny human reaction she couldn't hide. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" she asked. Reeves nodded. She stepped forward, facing her recruits. Her voice was calm, but every word cut with truth. "You want to know what war is? It's not medals or stories. It's not the movies you watch. It's noise, deafening, endless noise. It's making decisions you'll remember for the rest of your life. It's saving one person and losing 3. She paused, scanning their faces. None dared look away. "My team," she continued quietly, "was ambushed. They fought to the last bullet. I was ordered to pull out to survive. But survival isn't victory, it's a debt. One I've been repaying ever since." Her voice faltered just for a second, then regained its edge. "That's why I'm here. Every time you think training is too hard or discipline is pointless, remember this. Discipline is what kept me alive long enough to come home and teach you not to make the same mistakes." Riley felt a lump rise in his throat. He had pointed a rifle at this woman. Now he couldn't even meet her eyes. When the assembly ended, no one spoke. The recruits simply stood there, absorbing every word she'd said like scripture. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Riley found her at the edge of the field, sitting alone, her boots dusty, her hair tied back in a loose braid. "Captain," he said softly. She looked up, calm as always. "Something on your mind, recruit?" "I just wanted to say I'm sorry, for the first day, for not understanding who you were." Shook her head. "You don't owe me an apology, Riley. You just needed to learn that respect isn't about rank, it's about reason." He nodded, then hesitated. "When you talked about your team, did you ever stop blaming yourself?" She took a long breath, eyes fixed on the fading horizon. "No," she said finally, "but I learned to live with the blame. It reminds me to do better." For a long moment, neither spoke. The air buzzed with crickets and the distant hum of the base generators. Then she stood, brushing dust from her uniform. "Get some rest, recruit. We've got another simulation tomorrow. You'll lead it." "Me?" He blinked, startled. "You're ready," she said simply and walked away. Riley stood there, watching her silhouette fade into the dusk, realizing that some heroes don't wear capes or chase glory. They just show up every day, carrying ghosts, teaching others how to survive. And Captain Dalton, she was one of those heroes. The morning sun burned through a thin mist that clung to the training fields, casting a pale glow over the obstacle course. The recruits stood in formation, sweat already dampening their collars. This wasn't a routine day today. Recruit Riley was leading the mission simulation. Captain Dalton watched from a distance, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She said only 5 words before the drill began. "Let's see what you've learned." Riley's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his earpiece. "Alpha team, move out. Beta, hold perimeter." His voice cracked at first but steadied as adrenaline took over. The simulation was designed to test leadership, communication, and composure under pressure. But unknown to the recruits, Dalton had quietly raised the difficulty level, doubling the enemy opposition and adding surprise scenarios. Within minutes, chaos erupted. Smoke bombs exploded near the trenches, recruits scattered for cover, and mock gunfire echoed through the field. Riley were flanked on the east side. Tors shouted through the radio. Riley crouched behind a sandbag wall, thinking fast. His instincts screamed to rush forward, but Dalton's voice echoed in his memory. Control isn't about charging ahead. It's about patience. Hold your position, he commanded. Bravo team, swing right and intercept. The move worked. Within minutes, they regrouped, covering one another in practiced rhythm. For a moment, it felt like they were winning. Then a sudden explosion. A smoke canister misfired too close to a fuel drum. The ground shook violently, and a blast of heat knocked several recruits backward. Screams filled the air. Dalton was already moving before the smoke cleared. Her boots pounded the dirt as she sprinted toward the chaos, heart pounding. She didn't hesitate, didn't even grab a mask. "Everyone down," she shouted. Her voice cut through the confusion like a blade. She dragged 2 recruits from the debris, coughing through the haze. Riley stumbled toward her. "Captain, I didn't. It was supposed to be controlled." "Then control it," she barked, her tone sharp but not cruel. "What's your next move, soldier?" Her words struck something in him. Panic turned to clarity. "Evacuate the East Trench. Use the slope as cover. Move now." The recruits obeyed instantly. Riley coordinated them with precision he didn't know he had, guiding everyone away from the danger zone. Within minutes, order was restored. By the time the emergency crew arrived, the fire was out, and no one was seriously hurt. Dalton stood beside him, chest heaving from exertion. "You kept your head," she said quietly. Riley stared at her wide-eyed. "I thought I'd ruined everything." She shook her head. "You adapted, that's what leadership is. You didn't freeze, you made a choice." Her gaze softened slightly. "That's how soldiers survive, Riley. Not by being fearless, but by moving forward even when they're afraid." Later that evening, the recruits sat in the mess hall, nursing bruises and exhaustion. The fire incident had shaken them, but it also united them. For the first time, they felt like a real team. When Dalton walked in, the room fell silent. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone commanded attention. "You all did well today," she began. "But let's be clear, it wasn't perfect. You'll make mistakes. What matters is how you respond to them. You can't control every outcome. You can control your reaction." Her eyes landed on Riley. "You proved that today." The recruits glanced at him, some nodding in quiet respect. Riley felt heat rise to his cheeks. After she left, Tors leaned over with a grin. "Never thought I'd say it, but I kinda miss her yelling." Riley smirked. "That's because it means she cares." Outside, the night settled over Fort Warren, calm, peaceful, deceptive. None of them knew that tomorrow, Dalton would face something far worse than fire or failure. Because the ghosts of her past, the ones she thought she'd left behind, were finally coming back for her. The next morning broke with the kind of cold stillness that usually came before a storm. Captain Dalton stood outside her quarters, a mug of coffee in her hand, staring toward the training grounds. The recruits were already running drills, louder, stronger, more confident. She should felt proud, but something in her gut twisted. The sound of tires crunching on gravel pulled her back. A black SUV rolled to a stop near headquarters. 2 men stepped out, dressed in civilian suits but moving with unmistakable military precision. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head, approached. "Captain Dalton." She straightened. "Yes." "I'm Agent Collins, Department of Defense liaison. We need to speak privately." Her jaw tensed. "About what?" He glanced toward the recruits. "It concerns Operation Shadow Gate." The words hit her like a bullet. For years, she'd buried that operation deep, the mission that had taken everything from her. Inside her office, the air grew heavy. Collins placed a file on her desk. "We've recovered new intel from the region. It appears someone who was presumed KIA from your team might have survived." Dalton froze. That's impossible. I saw the explosion myself. Collins slid a photo toward her. It showed a grainy image, a man, bearded, standing in front of a checkpoint overseas. Staff Sergeant Blake Turner, Collins said. We believe he's alive and not on our side. Her breath caught. Turner had been her second in command, her closest ally, her friend. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you're the only one who knew him well enough to confirm the ID. And if he's gone rogue, we may need your help tracking him. She leaned back, her pulse hammering. I'm a trainer now, my war, over. Collins shook his head. Not if he's coming here. Those words lingered like smoke long after he left. That night Dalton sat in the dim glow of her quarters, staring at the photo. Turner, the man who'd saved her life twice, the man she'd left behind in the chaos of that mission, was alive, or something close to it. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she said. Riley entered, looking hesitant. Captain, everything okay? You looked off today. She forced a small smile. Just a long morning. He hesitated, then placed a small patch on her desk, a training badge with the words "Lead with Honor." We made these for you, he said, because, well, none of us would be here without you. For the first time in years, throat tightened. Thank you, Riley. He turned to leave but stopped. You know, I think you fight more ghosts than we do. She looked at him sharply. What makes you say that? He shrugged. You always act like someone's still out there, like you're waiting for something to come back. He wasn't wrong. Later that night, unable to sleep, walked the perimeter of the base. The moon hung low, the air sharp and dry. She thought of Turner's laughter, the last words he'd shouted through the radio before the blast. Go. I'll hold them off. Her mind raced. What if he hadn't died? What if he'd been captured or worse, converted? A rustle in the shadows made her stop. Who's there? She barked. No response. Then a faint whisper carried by the wind, her own name. Her blood ran cold. She spun, weapon drawn, but the darkness swallowed everything. She knew it wasn't real, just her memory playing tricks. Still, when she turned toward the barracks lights, she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was already watching her. And far beyond the base, in a motel room outside L, a man with a scar down his cheek stared at a map of Fort Warren, his finger tracing its edges. Found you, he muttered. Rain pounded the roofs of Fort Warren like distant gunfire. Captain Dalton stood in the command room, her uniform damp, her eyes locked on the security feed. The storm wasn't the only thing brewing. Surveillance had just confirmed it. Blake Turner, the man she once trusted with her life, was on base. Lock down all gates, she ordered. No one gets in or out. Her recruits looked up, alarmed. Riley stepped forward. Captain, what's going on? Dalton hesitated only a moment. A hostile infiltrator, former Special Forces. You trained for this. Now it's real. She didn't tell them. It was her past coming for them. Outside, lightning slashed the sky as the power flickered. The alarms wailed. Shadows moved through the storm, one of them too deliberate, too confident. Turner grabbed her rifle, her expression like stone. Stay behind me, she commanded. The recruits followed her through the rain-slicked corridors, adrenaline surging. They reached the storage hangar, where the power had died completely. Silence, except for the steady dripping of water from the roof. Then a voice echoed through the dark. Always knew you, end up teaching. Her pulse spiked. Turner. He stepped from the shadows, face half-lit by lightning. His uniform was tattered, his eyes colder than she remembered. You left me, he said flatly, buried me with the rest of them. You ordered me to go, she shot back. You made me promise to finish the mission. He smiled bitterly. And you did. You finished it by erasing me. Riley raised his weapon. Captain, say the word. Lifted a hand. Stand down, Riley. Her eyes stayed locked on Turner. You want revenge, fine, but you leave them out of it. Turner tilted his head. They're soldiers, aren't they? Time they learned what war really costs. He moved fast, too fast. A flash, a shot. Riley dove, the bullet grazing his arm. The recruits returned fire, scattering for cover. Sparks burst from the walls. Dalton darted left, flanking him. Years of training came flooding back. She rolled behind a crate, fired twice. One hit his shoulder, sending him staggering. Still quick, he growled, but softer now. Try me, she hissed. The fight turned brutal. Fists, elbows, the clash of old comrades turned enemies. Turner swung a wrench, she ducked, swept his legs and disarmed him. But he was relentless, driven by years of betrayal. Finally, he pinned her against the wall, his arm across her throat. You think you're better than me, he snarled. No, she rasped, just stronger for what I've lost. In one swift motion, she slammed her knee upward, knocking the wind out of him. The recruits charged, helping her subdue him. Riley cuffed Turner's wrists as stood over him, breathing hard. War didn't break you, Turner spat. It hollowed you out. She looked down at him, rain streaming down her face. Maybe, but at least I didn't forget who I was fighting for. Military police stormed in moments later, hauling Turner away. As they dragged him out, he gave her one last glare. This isn't over. Didn't reply. She simply turned to her recruits. They were soaked, bruised, exhausted, but alive, and looking at her with something deeper than respect, pride. Riley stepped forward, voice steady. You said discipline saves lives. I get it now. She nodded, a rare softness in her expression. You all did good today. You didn't freeze. You trusted each other. That's what makes a soldier. Outside, the storm began to fade. The first light of dawn touched the wet fields. Watched it in silence, the weight of years finally easing. The ghosts that haunted her still lingered, but now she wasn't fighting them alone. For the first time since Shadow Gate, she allowed herself to breathe. At Fort Warren, her war had finally found its ending, not in vengeance, but in the soldiers she'd taught to rise above it. And somewhere deep down, Dalton, the soldier, the survivor, the teacher, finally found peace.